Hello and welcome. This is Dr. Malachi Bishop. I'm a professor with the Rehabilitation Counseling Program at the University of Kentucky, and this is week one of RC-750, Rehabilitation Counseling Research and Program Evaluation. This week we will be introducing you to the course. In the next few minutes, we'll be talking about the syllabus and some of the requirements for this course. We will also be talking about rehabilitation counseling professionals as consumers and producers of rehabilitation counseling research. And then we will be discussing some issues and topics, hot topics, and what's important right now in rehabilitation counseling research and program evaluation. So I wanted to start by going over just a few key points in the syllabus. I want to encourage you to go to the Blackboard site and review the syllabus carefully. There's a lot of information in the syllabus that I will not be talking about this week, but that you need to be aware of. So make sure you read your syllabus carefully. In the syllabus, you will note that I've listed a couple goals and objectives for the students in this course. The purpose of this course is to introduce students to rehabilitation counseling research, program evaluation, and research methodology so that you can become informed, critical, and reflective consumers and producers of quality rehabilitation counseling research. This course will provide a comprehensive introduction to rehabilitation counseling research, statistics, and research design. We will talk about hypothesis testing and basic statistics related to hypothesis testing and other forms of research that we use in rehabilitation counseling research. We will be talking about program evaluation. I want to emphasize, however, that this is not a statistics course. This will be an introduction, as I said, basic concepts in statistics that you need to understand in order to read and understand the rehabilitation counseling research and to participate at an introductory level in the rehabilitation counseling research. So we will be talking about basic statistical procedures, concepts, and terms. So, by the way, if you are worried that your statistical background is not that strong, you'll be just fine in this course. We will be introducing the material at a level that you'll be just fine with, even if you don't have a strong background in statistics. The syllabus identifies that the graduate program in rehabilitation counseling is accredited by the Council on Rehabilitation Education, and the course covers or includes content on the following accreditation standards, including basic statistics and psychometric concepts, basic research methods, the effectiveness of rehabilitation counseling services and what the research can tell us about that, and then ethical, legal, and cultural issues related to research and program evaluation. So we will be covering all of that in this course. More specifically, the learning objectives for this course are that upon completion of the course, you will be able to articulate current knowledge of the field, have an awareness of the basic principles of rehabilitation counseling research, have a level of understanding of statistical procedures, psychometric methods, and research design that will enable you to analyze research articles in rehab and related fields. You'll be able to apply research literature to your practice. In other words, you'll be able to choose appropriate interventions or counseling techniques. You'll be able to plan assessments, to implement meaningful program evaluation, to perform outcome analysis, and to conduct consumer satisfaction studies, as we frequently do in this field. To continue, You will be able to participate in agency and community research activities, studies, and projects, and explain the importance of this participation to the development of the field. You will be able to develop and implement meaningful program evaluation and to provide a rationale for the importance of research activities and the improvement of rehabilitation services. You'll be able to use data to support professional opinion and testimony. You'll be able to conduct a review of the rehabilitation literature on a given topic or a case problem, and you'll be able to apply knowledge of ethical, legal, and cultural issues in professional research and evaluation. Students in this course will be evaluated on the following assignments and 3 exams. The course requirements and the percentage of the total grade is presented in the syllabus, and it's listed here. It includes 10% of your total grade will be based on discussion board participation, and you'll be required to do at least 2 posts each week. And the syllabus identifies the penalty for late submission of posts under the important note, and so you should pay attention to that. You will be asked to complete the City Human Protections training. This is an excellent course, and the material for accessing the course is available on this Blackboard site. It is a course offered to present you with the information that you will need to understand a lot of the ethical content, a lot of the history of the ethical guidelines that we use today in rehabilitation counseling research and in research in general. It's an excellent course, as I said. It will take you, the average learner spends about 4 to 5 hours completing that course, so you should get to work on that right away, because you are asked to complete the city training before the end of the 2nd week of the course. And you will be asked to provide the instructor with the certificate of completion by the end of the 2nd week of this course. So that is a requirement, and that's worth 5% of your grade, and the requirement is that you complete that training. The next requirement is the journal article critiques. Over the course of the semester, you will be required to complete 4 journal article critiques to develop and demonstrate skill in critically reviewing various forms and topics of rehabilitation counseling research. And that will be worth 8% of your grade. You'll be asked to complete 3 relatively short papers. One is a research literature review paper, which will be due week 4. Another is a research proposal paper, which will be due week 6, and that's worth 15% of your grade. And then you'll also be asked to complete a program evaluation project paper. That one is due in the last week and is worth 5% of your grade. And then, as I said, there will be 3 quizzes, each worth 15% of your grade. Total of 100%. As I said, read your syllabus carefully and contact the instructor if you have any questions about those assignments or anything else in this course that you're not sure about. I have 4 goals for the students in my rehabilitation counseling research course. The first is to help you understand rehabilitation research and program evaluation. I want you to develop a comfort with and an ability to understand and use the rehabilitation counseling research that is out there. I want to help you understand the value and the importance of rehabilitation counseling research and program evaluation. I want to help you use effectively the rehabilitation counseling research in your professional practice. And then finally, I want to help students do rehabilitation counseling research and program evaluation. Now, I know a lot of you may not be that interested in being researchers, but to be a rehabilitation counselor, to be an effective, competent, ethical rehabilitation counselor requires that we at least have the understanding of the way that research works and the value of rehabilitation counseling research. We need to know how to use it and how to apply it in our practice. But I really believe that it is also important that we participate as researchers ourselves, whether at a professional level or at the private local level. We want to be asking questions about is what we are doing the most effective way to be doing it. Are we up to date on the most effective ways to practice rehabilitation counseling? Are we doing things that could be improving rehabilitation counseling profession? And hopefully some of you will develop an interest in participating and contributing to our professional knowledge at the professional level. I'm talking about writing research articles, maybe pursuing your PhD and becoming a researcher, professor, administrator yourself. Probably all of you will be involved at some point in your career, and probably some of you will be involved quite a bit with program evaluation. So I want to, in this course, make sure that you develop competence and confidence in your ability to conduct effective program evaluation and to disseminate the results in a meaningful way. So those are my goals for you in this course. And now I want to talk a little bit more about goal 1 and what I mean with helping you to understand rehabilitation counseling research and program evaluation. The way I look at your development as researchers in this course, whether you are well-versed or whether you're new to the idea of research, I like to present it this way. I believe that we are all researchers. To live is to basically to conduct research. And what I mean by that is living is a process of observing the world around us and then forming hypotheses, forming ideas, in other words, about the way the world works. Sometimes we conduct personal experiments to test these hypotheses, to see if our ideas are right. And then we interpret the results of our experiments and we form conclusions. And even though you might not have thought about it that way, that's basically how we get along in this world. We are each of us personal researchers, and by conducting this research we add to our own personal knowledge base, and that helps us to be successful in our lives. So what I'm suggesting is you've already been doing this all your life. In this course we're simply exploring and learning to apply those processes that you have been using all your life in a more formal and specific professional context. So you'll be learning to use and apply the scientific method, to understand its limitations and its benefits over other methods of learning and building your and our professional knowledge base, the knowledge base of the rehabilitation counseling profession. So I said informally we are all researchers and that we all seek to understand our world and gain and apply knowledge to allow us to live better, more effectively, more happily, safely, efficiently, and so on. Formally, when we're talking about formal research in the context of this course, we're talking about a systematic process of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting information, just as you've been doing all your life. But in this course, we're going to learn about specific methods of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting information in order to increase our understanding of the specific phenomenon that we are talking about, which is rehabilitation counseling research and rehabilitation counseling as a profession. So in answer to the question, what is research? A useful definition that I'd like you to pay attention to is that research is a systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Knowledge that is generalizable to others, that other people can use, and in this case, that the rehabilitation counseling profession can use. Now we're going to start talking about research and knowledge and how we go about gaining knowledge about the world in general. Then later on we're going to talk about specifically how do we go about learning and gaining knowledge about rehabilitation counseling. But let's start with this general question about how do people gain knowledge about the world, and when does what we learn rise to the level of credibility? In this course, we'll be learning and talking a lot about the scientific method, which is one way of learning about the world. There are several others, but we're going to be suggesting we tend to focus in research on the approach of the scientific method. And so I want to talk about some of the ways that we come to know about the world and why some might be better than others. So how do we come to know about the world? One way is through trial and error. We try things out, we see if they work, and if they work, then we are likely to repeat them. If we find success in something after we try it, then we will repeat it. And if we try something out and it doesn't work, we fail or we have a bad result, then we try something else and we don't repeat that behavior. And through this process, we come to learn about the world and how to effectively make our way through it. We also learn through personal observation. So we watch other people and we see how they do things. And if they seem successful to us, then we will copy them and do what they do. And so that's how we learn to be successful in the world, by watching others. That's another way of doing it. Intuition and common sense. We look around and see that some things seem to make sense to us. We have things that just appear to be the way they are. And basically the idea here is that what is self-evident, so what appears to be that way and also seems reasonable to us, makes sense to us, is true. We accept that as acceptable knowledge, as true knowledge. That is how the way the world works. We know that this one isn't always reliable, though. There are a lot of things we see that would suggest one way of viewing the world that actually we know aren't that way. For example, we see the sun come up in the east, and we see it go around us, and at the end of the day it goes down in the west, and it would be perfectly reasonable to assume that the sun is revolving around the earth. For a long time, that was the way we understood things. That was just common sense, that it's evident that the sun is going around us. But we've come to have a different understanding about that. So sometimes common sense doesn't always work out. So how else do we learn about the world? Authority figures tell us things, and if we respect the person because they are an authority, then we will take what they say as true knowledge. So people like presidents and leaders and teachers and parents, people who we believe have more knowledge and more experience with a certain area of life. They know more than we do, so if they say a thing is true, then we're willing to accept it. Here again, there are problems with this one. Think about during a political campaign. You'll hear one candidate saying that this is true, and you'll hear another candidate saying that something else is true, and then maybe come to find out that neither one is true, and maybe the truth is something else. But we can't always take what authority figures say as truth, and we come to learn that. But generally, if we respect the authority and they know what they're talking about, then if they tell us something is true, then we'll believe it. Certainly this is true of scientists, especially people wearing white lab coats, for example. So you see commercials, the people in the commercials wearing white lab coats saying that this medication has been found to be effective, then people tend to believe that what they say is true. So that rises to the level of credibility. Tradition. This refers to beliefs and knowledge that we come to have about the world that has been passed down to us, maybe through our family, what our parents believed because their parents believed it, things like that. Also cultural beliefs about the world and the way things are. We gain a lot of knowledge from the various cultures that we belong to. So if cultures are groups that have shared values and beliefs, then we rise up and grow up into those beliefs. We come to believe that things are the way that people in our culture, people in our family say they are. And then there's the scientific method. And the scientific method we will be talking about quite a bit, but essentially the scientific method can be described as the application of research methods to conduct experiments, to test hypotheses, and to try and find truth, to try and develop knowledge. Each of these we're going to see has some problems, but we're going to say that the scientific method, for a variety of reasons that we will talk about in a minute, is the way that as researchers we tend to go. So as I said, there are problems associated with each of these ways of knowing about the world. And these problems extend even to the scientific method. In other words, even the scientific method is certainly not perfect. But we do give more credence to knowledge based on the scientific research, because although we do that, history tells us that knowledge derived in this way is also fallible. And let's look at why. Few reasons, but the first reason is that different people can interpret data in different ways. So we can each look at the same set of data and interpret it differently. And I have the picture of the elephant there to remind us of the story of the 5 blind men. You might be familiar with that story, the 5 men who wanted to know what an elephant was. And so they each approached the elephant and reached out and touched the elephant to see what the elephant was like. And so one of the blind men reached out and touched the trunk. And so he would interpret elephants as hose-like creatures. Another man reaches out and touches the ear and would interpret elephants as thin, leafy, paper-like animals, maybe. Maybe someone else reaches out and touches the tusk and would have a different interpretation. Someone else reaches out and touches the tail. Each one of us is looking at the same elephant or experiencing the same elephant, but we all have different interpretations about what an elephant is. And it's exactly the same way with a set of data. It's the same numbers we're all looking at, the same information, but we can interpret it in different ways. So that's one reason. Another reason is because science, like other forms of knowledge, involves a social consensus. What is studied and how it is studied are based on what is important to, or the agenda of, the researcher and the funding body, maybe whoever's providing the funding for the researcher. And as a result, you'll see that at different times in the rehabilitation counseling research, for example, different things gain importance and then become less important as something else becomes important. And this is based on social consensus, group idea about what is important at the time. Another reason is that all the information is never available. So we work with bits of information that we have perceived based on our view of the world and the tools that we have available. But it's always possible, and it generally happens, that more information becomes available, and now we have the opportunity to develop a different perspective, a better understanding. But all the information is never available, so we work with what we have. Fourth reason is that knowledge is arrived at through different approaches, perspectives, methods, and techniques. And based on these differences, based on the different methods that we use, the different beliefs about what is true or what is reality, the different approaches that we take, again, we may come up with different ideas about what is true, what is knowledge. And then the fifth reason, understanding is affected by our perspective and approach, our basic understanding of reality and the world. What do I mean by that? As you will see in the reading, a couple of examples of different ways of coming to understand and approaching knowledge about the world are presented. The positivist approach suggests that there is an objective reality and that it can be discovered, observed, and measured. So this means that there is a truth, there is an objective reality about the thing that we are trying to learn more about. There is a truth out there and we can find it. And this is even true of abstract social realities like intelligence and aptitude. There is an objective fact known as intelligence, and we can find it, we can measure it, we can observe it. On the other hand, the constructivist or post-positivist approach suggests that reality is socially constructed. It's developed or created by the participants. And from this perspective, we give meaning or ascribe meaning to social situations, and these meanings and realities will differ based on what your social situation is, based on your culture, your different experiences. So think about disability, for example. From a positivist approach, the idea would be that disability exists. And you might think of, for example, the medical model, which suggests that there is such a thing as disability, and generally it is the seen as the impairment or the condition or the loss of limb or problem with the organ within the individual. So it is a thing that we can see, we can observe it within the individual, and we can say this is a disability. That would be a positivist approach. Thinking about disability from a constructivist or post-positive approach, we would say that disability is created by the social and physical environment. For example, if a person uses a wheelchair, we might say that they are limited, they experience disability because the environment is built in such a way that they are unable to access it. So buildings that are entered through stairs, for example. So a person is unable to enter if they use a wheelchair, then this disability is actually created by the interaction of the person with their environment. Same with social ideas and attitudes. These are things that are created by social groups, and the disability exists because of our beliefs and attitudes about the disability. Different social groups will have different ideas about disability and specific disabilities that change the experience, change the meaning of that term. So there are different ways of approaching gaining knowledge. There are different perspectives on what knowledge is. And so all of this leads to different reasons that the scientific method is not perfect, why it's fallible, why it's not completely reliable. The implication, the important thing to keep in mind about these different ways of knowing and seeing the world is that we must study many different perspectives. We have to measure the things that we're measuring in different ways. And we have to realize that the way we're doing it isn't the only way. There are others who will ascribe meaning to things in different ways. There are others who will take different approaches and come up with different results. A good example is the difference between qualitative and quantitative research. So this is two different methods of trying to gain knowledge about the world. Quantitative research, and we'll talk more about this, but just to introduce this idea, quantitative research involves the numerical expression of information for the purpose of summarizing, quantifying, and classifying. In other words, quantitative research means using numbers to represent ideas. We put numbers on things and we measure them. It involves transcribing words and observations into numbers and then analyzing those numbers. Qualitative research, on the other hand, is focused on the perspectives of those most affected by the phenomenon, and it involves observing, describing themes, relationships, and describing experiences. And instead of numbers, qualitative research is based on language, words, and the interpretation of meaning. So two different approaches. They are not comparable, and neither one is better because they have basically different functions. A lot of times we use qualitative research to make observations, and our observations lead to questions and allow us to generate hypotheses. And then we use quantitative research to test those hypotheses. And so we cycle back and forth between the two approaches when we're exploring the same question. And we need to use and understand both approaches in order to fully understand many rehabilitation counseling research questions and problems. So we've said and we've seen that the science is not infallible. However, it can be argued that knowledge gained through the scientific method is preferable to many of those other ways of knowing about the world that we talked about. And this is for a few specific reasons. First is that it is based on the agreement of many knowledgeable people, not just one. And what that means is that in order for knowledge to be accepted by a profession, the claims of the researcher have to first be reviewed and accepted and approved by a group of knowledgeable people. So for example, if I do a research study and I want to disseminate it to the profession, I want to share it with the profession, and I do that by sending it to a professional journal, one of our rehabilitation counseling journals, it doesn't just get published, right? It has to first go through an editorial process. So the editor will send it to the editorial reviewers, and 2 or 3 or 4 people will read my manuscript, read the research I did, and if they agree with it, and if it makes sense to these knowledgeable people, then the editor may accept my article and say this has been accepted by a group of knowledgeable people as good research that's likely to add to the professional knowledge. Second reason that the scientific method is perhaps preferable is that it is based on a well-defined process of steps. And we'll be talking about these steps in a couple of weeks, this process of conducting research using the scientific method. But basically what it means is that everybody uses the same steps. And in these steps are processes that keep us honest to some extent. that make our process transparent so that people can see what we did, and we all go about doing research the same way. The third issue is that results are replicated by others not related to the first researcher. And what that means is before the profession will really accept a new knowledge claim, if a researcher comes out and says, this is the way that we should do rehabilitation counseling, that claim will not be accepted by the profession until we see evidence that it works across a number of situations or with a sufficient number of people. We need to see those results replicated. We need to see that study and those successful results found across a number of groups before we begin to accept that indeed this might be an effective approach to doing rehabilitation counseling. And then finally, the knowledge claim is based on the merits of the claim and not the person making the claim. And again, going back to the editorial review process, what this means is when the editor sends out the manuscript, the paper that has been submitted to the editor for publication in the journal, and he or she sends it out to those reviewers, they remove the name of the author. And we do that because there are researchers in the field who have written a lot and who are well respected and have come to be seen as experts in a certain area. So there are people who we know and respect in the area of psychosocial adaptation and job placement and program evaluation. And if I am reviewing an article and I see that person's name at the top of the paper, then there would be a tendency to say, if they say this, then it must be true. But blind review, so the names are removed and we don't know who wrote this manuscript, then it makes it more likely that we'll pay attention to the claims being made, to the process of research that was done, and we'll make a decision based on the merits of the research itself and not the person making the claim.